3 a.m. Police pounding on my door. Red and blue lights slicing through my blinds. Not for a crime, for a parked truck. My neighbor Karen, the HOA vice president, had declared war on my driveway. Fake bylaws. Staged audits. 3 a.m. wellness checks. But when I uncovered her secret double life as treasurer, forged violations, and a $3,000 gold-plated bench with her initials, the entire neighborhood revolted. This is how a dusty Ford F-150 sparked a suburban mutiny, and why Karen's reign ended in handcuffs. I hadn't lived in the neighborhood for more than a few months before the first sign of passive-aggressive suburbia showed up, folded neatly under my windshield wiper. A printed note in cursive Comic Sans read, "Just a friendly reminder, we don't park trucks in driveways overnight." Smiley face. HOA standards first. I left. My truck, a dusty old Ford F-150, wasn't breaking any rules. I had checked the bylaws before moving in. Still, I gave the note the benefit of the doubt. Maybe it was a neighbor trying to be helpful, but the notes were just her opening move. What she did next would turn my driveway into a war zone. It happened again, same note, same handwriting, this time with a highlighted sentence and an underlined, HOA compliance is not optional. That's when I started asking around and learned about Karen, Capital HOA Board Vice President, self-appointed enforcer of community vibes, and apparently, my personal driveway inspector. Karen introduced herself one sunny Saturday morning while I was pressure washing the walkway. She marched over in white capris and a visor that looked like it moonlighted as a tennis racket, holding a clipboard and oozing superiority like it was her job. "You must be the truck guy," she said, not offering a name or handshake. "We try to avoid industrial-looking vehicles parked where guests can see them. It's aesthetic pollution." I stared at her, wondering how long it had taken her to workshop that phrase. "It's my driveway," I replied plainly, "and the bylaws say I can park a personal use vehicle there." Karen didn't flinch. "Well, rules can be updated, especially when the community agrees something is unsightly." Turns out, this wasn't just a nosy neighbor. It was a calculated power play. From then on, it became a silent war. Every time I parked in the driveway, a note would appear. She started escalating, taking photos from across the street, emailing anonymous complaints to the HOA board, which I later found out was just her sending them from her burner Gmail, and citing fake bylaws like Article 3B, no vehicles with tires larger than 31 inches. I half expected her to start measuring with a tape. Then came the flyers, bright orange slips left on my door declaring a community appearance audit coming soon. It was clearly a power move, one she didn't expect me to ignore. But I did. The truck stayed. It became a point of pride, and that's when Karen decided to get personal. She stopped by one afternoon while I was replacing a spark plug, acting sugary sweet. "Hey, listen, I've got family coming in 2 weeks for my daughter's engagement party. We're expecting a lot of guests. Would you mind, just for the day, parking your truck somewhere else so they can use your driveway?" I blinked. "You want me to move my truck so your guests can park in my driveway?" She smiled like it was the most normal request on earth. "Yes, it's just better for overflow. Your house has the best access point, and honestly, some of my guests are older." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Yeah, I'm going to pass on that." Her smile thinned into a sneer. "I just hope the board doesn't think you're being unneighborly after that." Then things got weirder. Then came the sabotage, birdseed to attract hawks, lemon peels tossed in the bed, petty strikes to break me. But Karen didn't know I'd started collecting evidence. Every note, every oddity, every sarcastic little, just a suggestion, left taped to my garage door. One even said, "Some residents think your truck screams contractor energy. Maybe consider a smaller vehicle." My truck is stock. Karen was losing it. Then came the neighborhood audit, a fake event Karen orchestrated to gather fake evidence. She paraded around with a clipboard and a camera phone, pretending to take community notes, but everyone knew it was just about me. One neighbor shouted, "Karen, you need a hobby?" as she crouched beside my trash bins for a photo op. I waved. She didn't wave back. Later that night, Someone left a paper plate of cookies with a note. You're dealing with her now. Godspeed. The next morning, a new note appeared. Failure to comply with community aesthetics may result in escalated action. That's when I realized this wasn't about the truck. This was about control. Karen had probably spent her life gathering just enough authority to feel powerful, and my refusal to comply had triggered her inner tyrant. I expected another note, maybe another fake flyer. But what I didn't expect was what happened 2 nights later, when I woke up to red and blue lights flashing through my curtains and the sound of a firm knock at the door. It was 3:04 a.m. and Karen had officially lost her mind. When I opened the door at 3:04 a.m., still half asleep in basketball shorts and a Wu-Tang Clan t-shirt, I expected maybe a coyote situation or some poor Amazon driver having a breakdown. What I didn't expect was 2 police officers standing on my porch, one of whom was actively suppressing a smirk. "Sir, we received a call about a suspicious vehicle parked in your driveway," one of them said, gesturing toward my truck like it was a stolen tank. Caller reported it as abandoned, possibly stolen, and aggressively large. I blinked. Aggressively large? The younger officer let out a snort. "That's the phrasing she used," said the truck was threatening the harmony of the neighborhood. I looked past them, and sure enough, across the street, behind the curtains of her perfectly symmetrical windows, I could see a silhouette watching. Karen. I was now officially living in a petty war zone. I explained the situation. I owned the truck. It was registered, insured, and legally parked in my own driveway. The officers nodded, clearly realizing this was a bogus call, but still had to go through the motions. "Honestly," one said as he handed me back my license, "we've been here before. Same lady called last year on a guy because his Halloween decorations were too pagan." I apologized for the wasted time, but the officers actually apologized to me. "You might want to talk to the HOA," the taller one said, "or a lawyer. She's clearly got a vendetta." I chuckled as they left, but it wasn't funny anymore. Karen had escalated from paper notes to law enforcement. Later that morning, I checked my email and found a message with the subject line, "Urgent Community Concern Parking Abuse." Attached was a PDF titled, "Emergency HOA Meeting Agenda, Parking Enforcement Proposal." It was a 5-page manifesto, clearly written by Karen, loaded with passive-aggressive bullet points like excessive vehicular masculinity and vehicles that undermine neighborhood charm. She'd included photos of my truck taken from multiple angles and claimed it was a recurring source of visual distress during events and holidays. The best part? She proposed assigning guest parking priority zones, meaning that certain homes, like mine, would be designated overflow lots during neighborhood events. Basically, she wanted to turn my driveway into the community's valet station. That week, she tried to hold the emergency HOA meeting in her backyard gazebo. No official board approval, no quorum schedule, just folding chairs, lemon water, and a printed sign that read, "Community safety starts with compliance." I didn't attend, but my neighbor Monica, bless her sarcastic soul, did. She showed up in a camp chair with a mug that said, "Not today, Karen," and took live notes. According to Monica's post on Nextdoor later that evening, the meeting devolved into Karen lecturing for 45 minutes about neighborhood presentation, cohesion, and guest-centric accessibility. When someone asked how legally enforceable her plan was, she snapped, "It's not about legality, it's about expectations." That was when half the attendees walked out. But Karen wasn't done. 2 days later, an official-looking letter appeared in my mailbox marked HOA Sanitation Compliance Notice. It accused me of violating Section 4B, Maintenance of Driveway Space, claiming my truck's undercarriage could leak fluids and attract scavenger animals. I checked the bylaws again. There was a Section 4B, but it had nothing to do with driveways. It was about leaf collection schedules. Karen was faking citations now. I decided it was time to document everything publicly. I uploaded a post to our neighborhood Facebook group titled, "When Karen Attacks, a Truck Owner's Diary." It included photos of the truck, every fake violation notice I'd received, and a screenshot of her insane parking overflow proposal. Comments poured in. Turns out I wasn't the first target. One guy shared how she cited him for excessive wind chimes. Another said she called animal control because his dog's bark sounded sarcastic. A third posted a photo of a ruler sticking out of his lawn, claiming she threatened to fine him over grass height differential. Suddenly, the neighborhood had receipts. The post went semi-viral locally, racking up over 100 comments and a dozen memes, including a photoshopped image of my truck wearing Groucho Marx glasses, captioned, "The Suspect." Karen responded by doubling down. She began walking the block with a whistle and a clipboard, pretending to survey yards. When I saw her jot something down in front of my house, I stepped outside. "Something wrong, Karen?" I asked, holding my coffee. "Just doing a property with analysis," she sniffed, avoiding eye contact. "Pretty sure that's not a thing," I replied. "Well," she said with a fake smile, "some of us care about how this community looks to outsiders." I sipped my coffee. "Don't worry, nobody's buying admission tickets." That afternoon, she dropped off a new proposal in everyone's mailbox, Karen's Guidelines for Neighborhood Harmony. It included such gems as limit non-neutral vehicle colors to preserve palette consistency, encourage sedans over trucks for visual balance, and my personal favorite, discourage lawn ornaments that evoke rebellion or sarcasm. My neighbor Doug, who owns a pink flamingo holding a protest sign that says, "I'm retired, not obedient," almost cried laughing. Despite the chaos, I was oddly calm. Why? Because I'd started reading the real HOA bylaws and something wasn't adding up. There were clauses missing. Some of the citations Karen used didn't even exist in the official documents. And more interestingly, I learned Karen wasn't just the vice president of the HOA, she was also the acting treasurer and had been for the last 3 years with no election on record. Suddenly, the fake tickets, the phony meetings, the forged notices, they all pointed to something bigger than just my truck. Karen wasn't just trying to move a Ford F-150, she was trying to build a mini dictatorship, and I'd just become the first real resistance. I was barely a week removed from the first 3 a.m. police visit when it happened again, this time louder, more aggressive, and infinitely more unhinged. Flashing lights stummed through my bedroom blinds, and before I could even reach for my robe, I heard it, pounding on the front door and a shout that chilled me more than the December air. "Open up. We have a report of criminal obstruction of emergency access." I threw the door open to find 4 officers this time, one of whom had already unholstered his flashlight and was shining it into my truck like it was a getaway vehicle from a bank heist. "Sir, your vehicle is being cited as a hazard to emergency response vehicles," the lead officer said, flipping open a notepad. "Are you blocking a fire lane?" I blinked. I'm parked in my driveway. Again, from across the street, a figure in a long robe and fuzzy slippers was gesturing dramatically to the officers like a director choreographing a Broadway musical. It was Karen, of course, holding what looked like a laminated printout and some kind of ruler. "He's endangering lives," she shouted. "Imagine if someone had a heart attack and the ambulance couldn't reach my guests." One of the officers, clearly already done with life, turned to me and said under his breath, "She made us measure your driveway width on Google Earth before we came out here. She thinks it's 18 inches too narrow for safety." I stared at him. "Google Earth? 3 a.m.? He nodded dead-eyed. "She called dispatch 7 times before someone greenlit the visit." The laminated sheet Karen had waved turned out to be her own emergency accessibility diagram, a pseudo-engineering sketch of my property showing impossible traffic flows, exaggerated bottlenecks, and oddly enough, a helicopter landing zone. She insisted that my truck was creating the visual illusion of congestion, which could cause panic during emergencies. The officer sighed, "Ma'am, this is not a thing. Illusions are not code violations." But Karen wasn't listening. She now pointed at my porch light and hissed, "His light is glaring. My guests can't sleep during parties." One of the other officers mumbled, "I thought this was about paramedics." Karen pivoted without hesitation. "It's about the total safety environment. Light pollution is a silent killer. Despite her outburst, the police documented the call, rolled their eyes, and once again left me with no citation, just an apology and a weary recommendation: start keeping a log. You may want to file harassment charges. I stood in my driveway after they left, watching Karen shuffle back to her house, still muttering about vehicular dominance. That night, I ordered a set of motion-activated security cameras, one of those smile, you're on camera, signs, and a mug that said, I break for petty tyrants. The next day, things got even weirder. Karen began staging driveway rehearsals with cones and chalk outlines. I caught her walking her dog, which she always carried like a purse, and dragging it past my house while filming herself narrating fake guest arrival scenarios. Now imagine Cousin Doris pulling up. Oh no, she's blocked. Oh, the humanity. Her voice echoed across the block like an off-brand reality show. That evening, she left a binder in my mailbox, a binder labeled Suggested Vehicular Solutions Volume 1. Inside were printouts of approved neighborhood vehicles, mostly sedans and hybrids, her homemade diagrams again, and a polite but menacing request. Please consider voluntarily relocating your truck to public overflow parking for the duration of Q4. But this wasn't just personal anymore. Karen had started sending group texts to the neighborhood numbers she gathered through HOA records, warning of an escalating conflict at my address. She called it Truckgate. Someone leaked one of her messages online. It read, "We must take swift and decisive action to prevent this kind of rebellion from normalizing. The integrity of this community depends on one standard, mine." Yes, she actually wrote mine. Monica, my sarcastic neighbor, printed the message on t-shirts. Standard is mine. We sold 30 at the Next Block barbecue that, by the way, was originally Karen's engagement party. But after the binder incident, half the neighborhood RSVP'd, yes, to Monica's same-day counter barbecue 2 doors down. Karen's yard sat awkwardly empty, save for a small folding table, a bowl of spinach dip, and 3 elderly relatives who left early because someone kept shouting about property lines from our side. We could see her fuming through the bushes while someone sang karaoke to Take This Job and Shove It. Karen retaliated the next morning by posting laminated flyers on all the mailboxes again, the truck owner's ongoing disruption, a timeline. She'd now compiled every photo she'd ever taken of my truck, labeled with dates and captions like March 12th, parked at an aggressive angle, and April 2nd, casts unnatural shadow. My personal favorite was May 15th, possibly leaking confidence into street culture. I framed that one. But something had shifted. The community, once amused, now looked annoyed. People who tolerated Karen's rules now rolled their eyes when she walked by. Someone replaced one of her flyers with a meme, Karen level, final boss. Another attached a sticky note that read, blocking driveways? Try blocking your own ego. The sarcasm was catching on. My driveway had gone from battleground to monument. Neighbors started stopping by to chat in front of it. Kids skateboard past it like it was a landmark. One guy used it to calibrate his drone. Still, I wasn't taking it lightly. I kept every flyer, binder page, every screenshot of her texts and emails. And then one night, while reviewing the HOA website, I found something. Karen had listed herself on the site under 3 roles: vice president, treasurer, and communications liaison. Except those weren't elected positions according to the HOA charter. The VP and treasurer couldn't be held by the same person without a full board vote, a vote that had never occurred. She was violating her own HOA structure. It was the crack in the wall, and I was ready to push through. The moment I saw that dual role violation in the HOA charter, I knew Karen wasn't just annoying. She was unlawfully monopolizing the board. I started digging deeper. The HOA's publicly posted minutes from meetings were all suspiciously formatted the same way, with language that felt less like a group discussion and more like one woman ranting into a Word document. Sentences like, "The community unanimously agrees to implement stricter lawn edge symmetry standards," or "The board supports enhanced visitor visibility compliance," were all written in the third person, but with Karen's unmistakable flair for fabricated consensus. I checked the document metadata out of curiosity. Nearly every file had been created and last edited by one user, K. Mitchell, Queen HOA. Over the next week, I filed a public records request under our HOA's transparency clause. Karen had never expected anyone to use it. Within 5 business days, a thumb drive was delivered to my house by a frazzled HOA secretary who, I kid you not, whispered, "Good luck," before scurrying off. The drive included internal communications, archived meeting agendas, and a list of officer term limits. That's where I struck gold. Karen had technically served beyond her VP term by nearly 14 months. No re-election vote, no nomination, just existing in power through a silent coup. She wasn't just making up rules. She wasn't supposed to have any power left. That same night, I looped in Monica and Doug, my 2 favorite allies in the ongoing HOA Hunger Games, and we got to work. Monica, a freelance paralegal with a vendetta against neighborhood fascists, practically lit up with joy. Doug made a spreadsheet of every documented Karen offense: fake citations, 911 calls, illegal dual roles, harassment claims, and misappropriation of HOA letterhead. Doug even added a Karen quotient column that ranked each offense on a scale from annoying to full-scale cult leader. Our group chat was called Operation Muzzle Karen. We discovered that over the past year, Karen had charged nearly $3,000 in beautification fees to HOA funds, none of which had receipts. One of the line items simply read, "Seasonal curb enhancement." I thought I'd seen Karen's worst until a thumb drive of HOA records exposed her $3,000 beautification scam and a gold-plated bench with her initials. I walked around the neighborhood. Nothing had changed except a suspiciously expensive-looking bench right outside her house, gold-plated initials, KM. I couldn't believe it. She'd literally used HOA money to install her own royal throne on the sidewalk. Armed with our data, we confronted the HOA secretary, Janet, a kind but easily intimidated woman in her 60s who wore cat sweaters and always looked like she was hiding from a quiz. Monica gently walked her through the findings. Janet started crying halfway through. She told me I'd lose my position if I spoke up. She admitted, clutching her clipboard like a flotation device. She said anyone who questions the board gets removed for subversion of structure. I didn't even know what that meant. We assured her she wasn't in trouble. In fact, she'd just become the most valuable whistleblower in suburban history. With Janet on board, we decided to call a special meeting, not one of Karen's backyard lemonade coups, a real one, per HOA rules. If 1/3 of residents sign a petition, a general assembly must be held within 10 days. We needed 28 signatures. We got 41 in 6 hours. Apparently, Karen had once fined a guy for hanging wind chimes too musically, so people were more than ready. We submitted the petition by a certified letter, email, and just to be petty, taped a copy to her infamous parking cone. Karen didn't respond immediately. Instead, she launched a deflection campaign. That weekend, glossy flyers showed up on every doorstep titled Truth, Trust, and Trucks, the real story. Inside, she painted herself as a martyr defending the community against vehicular aggression, accused me of orchestrating a smear campaign, and even included a collage of my truck photos labeled with phrases like ominous posture, unauthorized shadow casting, and symbol of masculine defiance. My neighbor Jason held up the flyer at our next group meet and said, "Bro, she just called your truck a microaggression on wheels." The night of the emergency HOA meeting was glorious chaos. We booked the community center and filled it with folding chairs, coffee, and what Monica dubbed non-subversive snacks. Karen arrived wearing a power pantsuit and carrying 3 ring binders and a Bluetooth mic, clearly expecting to dominate. But when she reached the front table, Janet calmly handed her the agenda and said, "Tonight, the community will be reviewing your conduct. Please be seated." Karen blinked like she'd just been unplugged from the Matrix. I wasn't informed of this format. Doug replied, "Karen, we sent you 12 copies." One of them was hand-delivered by a Labrador wearing a GoPro. The room erupted in laughter. What followed was the most brutal suburban reckoning I've ever witnessed. Neighbors came forward with their stories. One by one, neighbors exposed her tyranny, the sarcastic dog bark citation, the mulch loyalty scheme. When Rick resigned mid-meeting, holding up her vehicular masculinity binder, even Karen's clipboard couldn't hide her panic. The room erupted in laughter. What followed was the most brutal suburban reckoning I've ever witnessed. Neighbors came forward with their stories, the dog barking sarcastically citation, the time she called code enforcement on a porch swing, the pool noodle incident of 2021. Each testimony was more absurd than the last. Karen interrupted constantly, demanded people respect parliamentary decorum, and at one point tried to declare a recess and leave. Monica stood and read the official bylaws aloud. No recesses permitted during an open conduct hearing without board approval, and you're not the board anymore. That's when Karen turned red. Finally, I took the floor. I brought out the receipts, her expired term limits, the misuse of funds, staged citations, the 3 a.m. police harassment. I ended by quoting her laminated flyer, "The standard is mine." Then I paused and said, "No, Karen. The standard is the law and you're not above it." The room erupted into applause. We voted. Karen was removed by an overwhelming margin. But she didn't go quietly. "You'll regret this," she hissed as she left, binder in hand like a dethroned Disney villain. Chaos will descend without order. Monica sipped her lemonade and muttered, "We've survived cicada season. We'll manage." But Karen wasn't gone. Not yet. Because the fallout from her power trip was about to get very, very real. Financial audits, legal consequences, and most poetically, a revenge she couldn't have seen coming from a mile away, even through her driveway ruler. 2 days after the emergency HOA meeting that effectively stripped Karen of her Triple Crown authority, I received an envelope on my doorstep, not hand-delivered with passive-aggressive flair like Karen's usual flyers, but sent via certified mail. Inside was a cease and desist letter from Karen herself. It was printed in Comic Sans. She accused me of orchestrating a community-wide defamation campaign and unlawful incitement of anti-HOA sentiments, citing such evidence as the Karen Quotient spreadsheet, Monica's t-shirts, and Doug's meme of her face photoshopped onto Napoleon. I laughed for 10 minutes straight before forwarding the letter to my attorney, Sam, a soft-spoken barbecue-loving legal wizard who specialized in HOA disputes and lived for situations like this. Sam read the cease and desist, immediately burst out laughing on speakerphone. "Comic Sans? That's not a font. That's a cry for help." I gave him the entire dossier, copies of every fake violation, screenshots of Karen's texts, and police reports from her 911 calls. When I mentioned the laminated driveway diagrams and visual congestion hazards, Sam asked, "Did she seriously try to cite you for shadow casting?" I confirmed. "Well," he said, "you're sitting on a civil harassment case and possibly fraud, depending on how she handled those HOA funds." The investigation began. Meanwhile, Karen wasn't slowing down. Since she couldn't issue HOA warnings anymore, she turned to an online smear campaign. A Facebook page appeared called Truck Tyranny, Standing Up to Neighborhood Negligence. It featured blurry, zoomed-in photos of my truck with captions like, "Blocking community oxygen flow," and "Psychological threat to symmetry." One post read, "If we allow this behavior, what's next? Boats? Chickens? A Winnebago revolution." Most of the comments were jokes. One user wrote, "I parked next to a truck once. My marriage fell apart. Thanks a lot, Ford." Another posted, "Just spotted Karen buying a level and whispering to a sidewalk crack." But Karen had finally pushed one authority too far. Remember those 911 calls she made? Sam filed a Freedom of Information Act request to obtain the police body cam footage from both 3 a.m. visits, and oh boy, it was gold. The footage clearly showed Karen pacing in her robe, breathless, yelling about emergency response corridors, and waving a flashlight like she was directing air traffic. One officer even muttered, "Lady, it's a driveway, not the Autobahn." At one point, she claimed my truck was leaking testosterone into the atmosphere. The footage practically edited itself into a training video for how to lose HOA power in 10 steps. Sam sent a formal complaint to the city regarding misuse of emergency services. Turns out, Karen's 911 calls were logged under public disturbance with suspicion of personal dispute, and the department had flagged her address. She was now under review for making repeated false emergency reports. If the city ruled against her, she could face up to $1,000 in fines, and that didn't include my civil suit. Then came the audit. With Karen dethroned, the remaining HOA board reluctantly initiated a financial review of her activities. Monica joined the audit team as a volunteer because chaos is her cardio, and within days, we had receipts, or rather, the lack of them. Karen had submitted thousands in beautification expenses without invoices, vendor contacts, or budget approval. One item stood out: $1,450 marked as Q3 Harmony Enhancements. We found out it was for custom yard flags with a photo of Karen's face and the slogan, Pride, Peace, Property Lines. She'd only printed one and flown it in her own garden. Sam filed a small claim suit for harassment and emotional distress, backed by the police reports, flyer samples, witness statements, and HOA violations. But the piece de resistance came when we served Karen the lawsuit. Monica insisted on delivering it herself, dressed as a UPS driver, complete with a fake name tag, Cindy W., receipts, and a clipboard that said, "Your reckoning is here." Karen opened the door, saw Monica, and immediately slammed it shut. But the papers had been handed off, legally binding and metaphorically devastating. Public opinion shifted even harder. People who once tolerated Karen's antics began openly mocking her. A parody Instagram account popped up at The Real Driveway Karen. It posted daily updates like, Day 4, still no guest parking. Emotional damage continues. The mailbox where she used to leave flyers was now Shrine of Rebellion. Someone spray-painted "Free the Truck" on the sidewalk in chalk. Another neighbor placed a lawn gnome in front of Karen's house holding a sign that said, "I stand with the F-150. Then Karen made her last desperate move. She called a local news station and claimed she was the victim of a neighborhood bullying ring fueled by social media slander. The news crew actually showed up. I met them in my driveway, arms crossed, with the truck behind me like a majestic, gasoline-fueled dragon. "Is this about the parking?" the reporter asked. I nodded. "That's right." She tried to control my property, lied about safety concerns, and called 911 at 3 a.m. because I didn't offer up my driveway like a valet stand. The story aired under the headline, HOA Showdown. Truck owner says enough is enough. The segment ended with Monica holding up the laminated binder and saying, "This isn't a rule book, it's a cry for therapy." 3 days later, the city handed down its verdict. Karen was fined $750 for misusing emergency services and issued a formal warning. The HOA board, now purged of her influence, voted to permanently ban her from holding any leadership position. I won the civil suit. Karen had to pay court fees, damages, and, per Sam's glorious request, issue a formal written apology. She sent it on pink stationery that read, "Peace begins at home." The letter began, "To whom it may concern," and ended with, "I am sorry your vehicle caused so much confusion." We framed it. But we weren't done yet because karma had one last stop to make, and it came wrapped in steel, irony, and a big yellow brute. Karen's fall from grace wasn't a quiet fade into the hedges. No, this was an HOA meltdown so catastrophic it needed its own chapter in the neighborhood newsletter, which Monica later retitled, "The Weekly Witness Chronicles of Karen's Collapse." It started with the fallout from the lawsuit. Once word spread that Karen had been fined by the city, exposed for embezzling beautification funds, and forced to hand over a pink letter apology, people who'd once feared her started speaking out like survivors of a suburban dictatorship. One guy, Mike, admitted she'd threatened him with a violation because his basketball hoop was visible from space. Another mom revealed that Karen had reported her swing set as a structural hazard. The dam broke. Then came the secret emails. Janet, our formerly timid HOA secretary turned folk hero, revealed that Karen had been sending private directives to board members, most of which weren't just unethical. They were borderline conspiratorial. In one email, she wrote, "If we can apply pressure through 3 citations in 1 month, most residents back off. Fear creates order." Another said, "Don't let the renters get confident. They'll start thinking they're owners." The most shocking one, "If anyone challenges my role, remind them I organized the 2020 mulch distribution. They owe me." Yes, she was wielding mulch loyalty as political leverage. The neighborhood turned into a drama-fueled game of Survivor. Everyone was picking sides. Some of Karen's former allies tried to distance themselves by claiming they never really agreed with her tone or thought the cones were a bit much. One board member, Rick, resigned mid-meeting, stating, "I joined this HOA to approve Halloween decorations, not to help Karen run a suburban Hunger Games." The next morning, someone zip-tied a plastic pumpkin to his mailbox with a note that read, "You did your best, Pumpkin King." Karen, desperate to maintain control, attempted a counter-audit, a bizarre act of retaliation where she tried to investigate us. She filed 5 anonymous complaints to the city, alleging everything from illegal chicken coops to non-native grass species. All were dismissed. In one case, the inspector came out, saw the claim, and laughed so hard he asked if he could take a selfie next to my truck for the story. Even city staff were catching on. A clerk at City Hall reportedly told Monica, "We have a code name for Karen now. It's Operation Overkill." In retaliation, Karen started patrolling again. Only now, instead of HOA-branded clipboards, she wore a neon safety vest labeled Neighborhood Guardian. Doug nearly crashed his bike when he saw her standing at the corner, saluting cars as they drove by. She claimed it was part of her civic engagement rebrand. We called it her tinfoil tour. She stood next to speed limit signs with a stopwatch. She filmed sprinklers for allegedly watering too assertively. One neighbor spotted her measuring the angle of a recycling bin lid. The caption on that photo, "This woman needs a sandbox, juice box, and nap." But perhaps the most poetic moment came at the next HOA town hall, now under new, legitimate leadership. Residents brought their receipts, printed emails, screenshots, footage of Karen dragging a measuring wheel around like she was mapping for a new civilization. One elderly couple said she once scolded them for clapping too enthusiastically at a jazz night. Karen, still clinging to her laminated legacy, showed up late with a color-coded binder and tried to seize the podium. New board president Carla gently but firmly said, "You're welcome to make a public comment like anyone else." 3 minutes, no visuals, no metaphors. Karen turned purple. She began her speech by declaring that she had been unjustly overthrown by an angry mob of anti-truck radicals. When someone left, she snapped, "You don't understand. This community needs rules." Monica responded, "We're fine with rules. We just don't want a dictator enforcing them with a label maker and an unhinged YouTube channel." That's when Karen made her biggest mistake yet, threatening to sue the entire board for emotional displacement. Carla calmly asked, "Is that a legal term?" Karen screamed, "It is now," and stormed out. The HOA issued a neighborhood-wide vote to officially expel Karen from all future board eligibility, unprecedented but totally legal per the bylaws. 94% voted in favor. The remaining 6% either didn't respond or accidentally clicked the wrong link. It was a landslide. The cherry on top came the following Saturday. Karen tried to host a community cleanse gathering in her front yard, complete with folding chairs, motivational signage, and cucumber water. No one showed up, not even her dog. Halfway through her speech, which she live-streamed on Facebook Live to 7 viewers, a city vehicle pulled up in front of her house. The officer got out, inspected the curb, and placed a massive yellow boot on her car. Turns out she'd racked up multiple citations for expired registration and ignored tickets from her own over-policing tactics. That's right. Karen, queen of parking standards, just got publicly immobilized by the very rules she weaponized. Monica walked by and whispered, "You parked in the wrong destiny." Later, we learned Karen sold her house. The listing included the line, "Recent HOA activity has sparked spirited discussion in the community." It sold for $10,000 under asking. The day she moved, the entire neighborhood gathered, not to say goodbye, but to celebrate the first official Karen-free Friday. Doug made punch. Janet wore sequins. Monica handed out party favors shaped like tiny traffic cones that read, "Never forget." As Karen's U-Haul drove away, a few of us waved. Someone blasted, "Hit the road, Jack," on Bluetooth. She didn't wave back. You think the story ended when Karen's U-Haul hit the main road and her HOA boot was the last thing we ever saw on our street. But fate had one more twist to deliver. 3 months after Karen left, peace returned to the neighborhood. People decorated their lawns freely. My truck became a local landmark. Monica even geotagged it Freedom Ford on Google Maps. And for the first time in years, the HOA meetings were boring in the best way. We debated real issues, like whether the community garden should grow kale or collard greens. Nobody shouted. No one laminated anything. Janet even smiled again. But then, just as things were settling, Doug walked into the monthly meeting with a strange look on his face and said, "You guys, Karen's back. Not here, but close 4 blocks over. New build subdivision, same zip code. She just bought a corner lot with a 3-car garage." Monica dropped her pen. "You're telling me she's moved within drive-by distance?" Doug nodded solemnly. "And she's already on the Nextdoor app, stirring things up about unregulated mailbox heights." We all looked at each other like the survivors of a movie about to face the sequel. Then came the twist of all poetic twists. That new subdivision? It wasn't governed by a traditional HOA. It was part of a privately managed parking co-op. Every house's driveway, get this, was shared property. Shared meaning Karen now had to share her driveway with the neighbor next door, a guy named Luis who drove a lifted Ram with mud tires, decals, and a rear bumper sticker that said, "No Karen Zone." Apparently, when Karen confronted him about his visually alarming vehicle, Luis responded, "It's a truck, not a nuclear warhead. Calm down." But it didn't stop there. The kicker? The subdivision had mandatory rotational driveway assignments on weekends to accommodate limited guest parking. That meant every few Saturdays, Karen had to park on the street, something she tried to ban 3 times in our old neighborhood. The woman who once called my truck a threat to communal harmony now had to leave her Lexus exposed on the curb like everyone else. Sweet symmetry. News of her new misfortunes trickled back to us like divine gossip. Luis's teenage daughter reportedly started a TikTok account chronicling life with Driveway Karen, featuring grainy footage of her pacing the sidewalk, muttering things like, "This is chaos," and "Why would anyone choose a red truck?" One episode captured her measuring the distance between Luis's side mirror and a mailbox while ranting about vehicular feng shui. The account went viral, millions of views. One commenter wrote, "I'd watch 10 seasons of this. Release the HOA cinematic universe." Then came the email. An unexpected message appeared in the inbox of our new HOA president. It was from Karen. The subject line, "Request for reinstatement consideration." We nearly spit out our coffee. She claimed she had grown, learned from her experiences, and developed a more community-first approach to property harmony. She also attached a new draft proposal for a vehicle aesthetics committee. Monica printed it, turned it into origami, and set it on fire, ceremonially, of course. In the spirit of community and for laughs, we held a vote anyway. Unanimous. Declined. Monica added a clause to the HOA charter that read, "No person who has attempted vehicular exorcism shall be permitted future governance." We sent Karen a reply in Comic Sans. The subject line, "Rejection in accordance with Karma Policy 3A." As for my truck, it's still parked in the driveway, same spot, same angle. The aggressively large Ford now sports a magnetic decal that reads, "Certified Community Icon." Every once in a while, tourists following the TikTok story come by and take photos with it. I smile, wave, and consider starting a lemonade stand called Driveway Defense Fund. Karen? She's still out there somewhere in suburbia, locked in a silent war with curb paint and mailboxes that lean 1.3 degrees too far left. But here in our block, order has been restored. The HOA is run by sane people. The neighbors chat freely. Janet has taken up salsa dancing. Monica? She made a limited edition coffee mug line that says, "I survived the Karen epic." We sold out in 2 days. And every time I walk past my truck, I remember the lesson Karen never learned. Power gained through fear always runs out of gas. Karen thought rules were her superpower until the day her own Lexus got the yellow boot. But her downfall wasn't the end, because 3 months later, she moved next to a guy with a "No Karen Zone" bumper sticker. And this time, the HOA was on his side.